Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on threat exposure management landscape for solution providers in 2025. Leading this session will be Craig Halliwell, Senior Director of Global Channels, and Mark McDonald, Senior Product Marketing Manager from Flare. During the session, if you have any questions or comments, make sure to drop it in the chat. All right, Craig and Mark, I'll let you take it away from here.
Amazing. Thank you, Eunice. Really excited to be here today. Happy holidays to everybody that's tuning in and taking the time out of your day to join us. You see the agenda set here. We've got a couple different sections that we're going to go over. It's my goal, at least for the first chunk of content that you'll see, talking about the state of threat exposure management, identity intelligence, the infostealer malware economy, that you'll get general knowledge, general market knowledge about threat exposure management, and then more specific knowledge about the rising threat of infostealer malware that you can apply generally to your roles in the channel and partnership community in terms of cybersecurity. Then we'll get into probably the second half of the presentation, a little bit more Flare specific. I'll touch on some Flare differentiators, some exciting products that we've launched in the last year that have specific value and interesting applications to end customers and our partners. And then I'll hand it over to Craig to kind of dive into the mechanics and the structure of our go-to-market with partners. So hopefully by the end of it, you'll learn a thing or two about the threat exposure management landscape, and then you'll learn a thing or two about what a partnership with Flare will look like. And yes, please feel free to jump in. I see Jeffrey. How's it going? Jeff from Ironbow. Please feel free to drop anything in the comments, and then we'll save time at the end for Q&A as well. Eunice will kind of round up some questions, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So with that, let's dive in. Really quick first, just a bit about Flare, the company. Flare is a threat exposure management company. What does that mean? Without getting into too much jargon, because there'll be plenty of that later, Flare helps customers detect the types of external risks that are commonly leveraged by attackers. We're going to talk about a specific risk in terms of infostealer, but we'll also touch on some other examples. It's a unified solution that touches on certain other product categories like cyber threat intelligence, digital risk protection, and external attack surface management. We're founded in 2017. We just had a banner year, not included in this slide, but probably worth mentioning because the news just dropped last week. We just raised a Series B venture fund, and we experienced triple-digit growth last year. And a lot of it has to do with the competency that we have as an organization in terms of being able to be present in or look for threat exposures in the right places for customers, and that's what the kind of the figures on the bottom right hand side of your screen kind of speaks to. But I'm not going to assume, I'm not going to take anything for granted because threat exposure management is still a relatively new term in the space. I always joke that, going a few years back now, one of the CISO clients that I had, because I used to be in sales as well, was they just kind of described it as the what part of the alphabet do I buy this year problem, right? We all know there's lots of acronyms in cybersecurity. A lot of them can be complex and confusing. Threat exposure management, while it's a new term, it's not as complex as you might think. And I think one of the benefits of it, especially when you're thinking about positioning new concepts or solutions to end customers, it logically makes sense. So this is the easiest way that I've described in the past. I also like to work and communicate in memes sometimes. So the thesis behind threat exposure management is, for a very long time, from about the turn to the new millennium, when the term CVE was coined, and like software vulnerabilities started to take a shape and a definition and a structure to them, all the way until about 2015 or so. Threat exposure management was synonymous with vulnerability management. I think most of the end customers that you'll have experience with are all well familiar with vulnerability management now, Patch Tuesday, prioritizing vulnerabilities, etc., making sure that those gaps and risks are closed so they can't be exploited by attackers. Threat exposure management follows the same idea. The thesis is essentially the same. It's just, now that we live in a world, especially after COVID, right, that remote work is more present, the use of a variety of different SaaS tools and cloud tools are present. Basically, the call to action, and it was Gartner that coined threat exposure management, is that the same programmatic concept of identifying, defining, and remediating threat exposures ought to be, the scope of that ought to be widened to include all different kinds of other risks that exist on the external perimeter of an attack surface. And this is kind of a simple visual that describes it. To understand the type of risks that exist on the wider attack surface, I've got a couple anecdotes that I could give you. One real quick here is, earlier in the year, we identified a local physical security company that kind of did things like camera systems and security systems for retail stores. They were breached, victims of ransomware. What typically happens is, if these ransoms are paid or aren't paid, it's sometimes in both cases, unfortunately, the data, the encrypted data is posted on we're called ransomware data leak sites. What happened in this particular case was, this company, their data was dumped, and the data set contained a lot of sensitive information about the physical security systems of a number of large retailers. Like, we're talking where cameras are located, in some cases like the local admin password and credentials for physical security systems. So that just kind of gives you an example of, if you look at like the two ends, the digital supply chain and physical assets, those are examples of the wider attack surface being potentially exploited and existing, and that would be detected with the threat exposure management solution. The other one that we're going to talk a bit more in detail, of course, is identity. The ecosystem of leaked credentials and infostealer malware, identity being kind of the primary vector that connects most of these aspects of an attack surface. The role that plays in exposure management is obviously very important as well. Like I said, we'll touch on that in more detail shortly here. So I wanted to talk about this slide just to kind of give you a sense that threat exposure management is very much a programmatic concept. You'll see vendors describe themselves as threat exposure management, like Flare, right? But the truth is the nature of the problem and like the aspects of a program are a lot more complex, and more complex, honestly, than what one single vendor could possibly handle. There's a lot of layers and a lot of aspects to it, and I'm going to touch on like the basic steps of an exposure management program in a second here. But I wanted to call these different product categories out just for your knowledge and your information to and in terms of sales opportunities as well, that in an ideal state, right, an end customer would have aspects that potentially touch on all of these categories, some of which Flare are very well aligned with, and some of which are not. Like some of the examples on the right hand side there, different types of breach and attack simulation technologies that kind of will automate the type of work that a pen test, a light pen test would do. Those technologies are certainly interesting. CASM, CAASM, or Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. These are tools that exist that are kind of like the next wave or the next generation of like asset management technologies that kind of give a really good internal and external inventory of different assets that, and then associated risks with those assets that provide really good visibility to customers. Bug bounty platforms. These are firms like BugCrowd and HackerOne, which are useful, especially for like public-facing web applications that can be leveraged to find the discover threat exposures in a crowdsourced kind of way. These are all aspects that would feed into a threat exposure management program. I think if you think about it too, in terms of like left to right here, in terms of maturity of a customer, it probably follows that journey, right? Like almost all of your customers will already have a vulnerability management program, for example. And then you kind of, the next step of maturity would be touching on some of the aspects that Flare is well aligned with our platform. And then customers more on the higher end of the maturity spectrum will likely be perhaps interested in some of the emerging TEM technologies that are listed there. And yeah, help navigating the jargon. I made my joke earlier of the different acronyms that exist in cybersecurity. This also helps understand why unifying these terms in a single solution makes sense, because really what you're talking about when you're discussing external attack surface management, digital risk protection, dark web monitoring, and threat intelligence is these are different places where threat exposures can exist, right? So in the context of EASM, you're talking about things like open ports or unaccounted for domains, stuff that exists on the perimeter of an organization that could be exploited by an attacker. Digital risk protection, sometimes synonymous with like brand protection. These are digital brand assets that exist that could also be leveraged by an attacker to impact brand or negatively impact customers financially. So that's where that fits there. And then dark web monitoring. This is kind of like a broad and sometimes overly FUD-y term because it kind of sounds spooky. But really, when we're talking about dark web monitoring, we're talking about having visibility into the places. Usually, they're forums. Sometimes they're even more publicly accessible chats and platforms like on Telegram. You're talking about monitoring the places where cyber criminals are interacting with each other and monitoring those communications and monitoring the commerce that exists between them. So again, it's a place that you want to have in a threat exposure management program. And then threat intelligence is probably the most broadest term of them all, right? It can sometimes refer to free feeds that anybody can sign up for and route to their security systems like firewalls and endpoint security. And it can also refer to a lot more sophisticated and expensive forms of threat intelligence that are provided, and kind of everything in between. So that's like a broad umbrella term, but also an important component of any threat exposure management program. In terms of thinking how, and maybe putting like your consultative hat on when you're describing a threat exposure management program to customers. At a high level, these are the steps that they're going to want to go through or that are recommended. So discovery, that's obviously a logical starting point. You can only know about the threat exposures that you're actively finding, and you got to be looking in the right places. So where do they exist? How often are you looking for them? How many do you have, and in what category do they fit in, like we discussed earlier? For all companies, and this is like regardless of size, right? And when you consider, you don't even necessarily have to consider the industry vertical, though that would factor into it quite to some degree. If you think about how most companies operate nowadays, again, with remote work being very, very common, with the use of many different kinds of SaaS technologies and cloud technologies, there's going to be a long list of areas where threat exposures could exist. And it doesn't really matter if you're a small business, medium-sized, large enterprise. It's just kind of the nature of modern work, right? So then the next main problem to solve after you feel like you've got a good handle on that you're actively discovering or you're actively looking for threat exposures in the right areas is how do you prioritize them? A lot of work could go into this process, prioritizing them in terms of the level of risk that they would present to a particular organization, prioritize them based on what specific systems or business functions that they might likely impact or not impact, to kind of at least provide some order to them in a way where you can kind of start understanding what needs to be addressed sooner than others. The next step, and this is a relatively, I guess, new concept, or at least probably asking more of customers, because this is, speaking to pen testing and offensive security primarily. Normally, right, it was thought of, and a lot of customers still think about it this way, that an annual pen test is kind of good enough to validate one's defenses and security posture. One of the challenges, or the calls to action of threat exposure management, is to embed the same philosophy of a pen test or a red team exercise into the threat exposure management process. So validating a threat exposure and testing it to see if it could be actioned by a real attacker. Obviously, that's a lot more powerful means of prioritizing a particular risk, because you have real world context to be able to discuss or to be able to communicate that risk more effectively to other stakeholders, if it was proven that it was leveraged in an attack or in a simulated attack that could be more impactful to prioritize and mobilize threats than just listing them, right? And then finally, this is mobilization or remediation. This is the end result, right? Once you've identified the threat exposures, and once you've validated them, you have them organized through this process, you take action on them. So that's threat exposure management at a high level, a quick overview. Now we're going to dive into a more specific type of threat exposure. And hopefully I can kind of challenge or introduce some new concept and challenge some preconceived notions that exist when you're talking about leaked credentials. A lot of customers and a lot of partners sometimes equate leaked credentials with something like you could get on Have I Been Pwned or a password manager. Oftentimes these types of sources are very dated, right? So what if your password from an account from 4 or 5 years ago exists on the dark web? That statement is true of probably pretty much everybody, right? How much risk does that really pose? Well, we're kind of going to get into here how the economy operates of leaked credentials, and then associated data that provide a lot more risk. So this year, arguably the two biggest breaches, certainly two of the top ones, the Change Healthcare ransomware attack, and then the breach that involved several high-profile Snowflake instances. The main attack vector in each of those cases was what we call, and what we'll call for the rest of the presentation, as a stealer log. This is a byproduct of infostealer malware. And in both of those cases, that data set, the stealer log data set, was leveraged as the primary way to attack these organizations. And then in the case of Change Healthcare, unfortunately, deploy ransomware. In the case of the Snowflake instances, gained or provided access to highly sensitive data. When you think about it logically, right, we all have this kind of like notion of, zero-day exploits and AI-powered attacks, and right, you'll hear all these kinds of buzzwords when that conjures up, honestly, again, like I mentioned earlier, fear, uncertainty, doubt, intended to scare customers or prospects, when really the answer is a lot more simple, and it's kind of summarized in the quote on the left-hand side there. Yeah, sure, a skilled attacker could leverage zero-day exploits or architect a complex attack. That can happen, it does happen, but why would you go through those steps when you can subscribe to a Telegram channel for $5 a month that feeds you fresh stealer logs that contain username, login credentials, browser information, PII, etc., and active sessions, and you can just jump into an active session in a matter of minutes. Path of least resistance, right? Which is exactly what infostealers kind of afford the users. Ease of use is also a big thing as well. You don't really need to be that skilled of a hacker or an attacker to leverage stealer logs. This slide kind of just describes at a high level how they work. Essentially, the malware, you can think of it as a vacuum that kind of sucks up all the sensitive information that exists on a web browser. So, like I said, username, login, password, anything that's like auto-saved, so address and other forms of PII. the geo stuff related to geolocation, as well as like any extensions and any like technical artifacts that might exist on the browser. They are the malware is deployed, the information is extracted, and then in a lot of cases, the malware self deletes very, very quickly. And this data is brought to market very, very quickly. And this is kind of what I telegraphed a little bit earlier in the presentation was, you know, when you hear about leaked credentials or like your password being stolen, that kind of was what in this graphic here, at least, you would kind of categorize as like a tier one, widely available leaked credentials that don't pose that much risk. There's a low probability of exploitation. The thing about the economy of stealer logs is, in a lot of cases, this data from the malware that I just showed on the previous slide is brought to market very, very quickly, sometimes almost in real time, almost instantaneously. But at least according to the Verizon DBIR report of this year, in almost or over 2/3 of cases, the credentials in real attacks were observed less than 24 hours after the initial infection. So the takeaway here is that they're brought to market very, very quickly, which means it's a lot less likely that the victim machine or the victim organization will have be aware of it, and it's a lot more likely that it will be exploited, which obviously poses substantially more risk than kind of the more widely distributed leaked credentials. How it works too, because in the context of corporate security, I'm going to show some interesting data on what corporate assets we've observed in Stealer logs this year. How does this typically work? Because you might be asking yourself, okay, I get that maybe a personal machine might be susceptible to infostealer malware, and they most certainly are. But a corporate machine that has like CrowdStrike EDR or Windows Defender EDR on it, that's going to block malware, right? Which is in most cases going to be true for sure, right? But then when you take a step back and think how much blended device use happens in the modern, in a modern work environment, then that's where you can kind of start thinking of like where the corporate risk exists, right? So this cartoon kind of illustrates things at a very high level, right? Personal device, maybe the dad or grandpa or the mom or grandma, who's an executive at a company. Maybe for whatever reason their corporate issued laptop broke down, or they're waiting for a new one to be sent to them. So they logged on to corporate assets using a personal machine, Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. Maybe she's a CRO and logged into a Salesforce instance, right? You can easily see how this scenario can play out. And then usually the way this malware is distributed, it's in a variety of ways. One of the most common ways is to unfortunately trick younger users. Video games are often a pretty common lure. So then, all of a sudden, Junior here gets a hold of the family machine, downloads something regarding Minecraft or Roblox or Fortnite, and then that's how the malware is distributed and sucks up the information about corporate assets that were logged onto earlier. And then in terms of how much we've seen, and this is just a sample of data, just to kind of give you a sense of how present corporate enterprise assets exist within our Stealer log database, a sample of our Stealer log database. So there's over 9 million logins, and this is just of like the most common corporate credentials. We didn't go crazy far down the list of SaaS. We just kind of like focused in on the most commonly used ones. But of course, as we know, the whole ecosystem of SaaS tools, there's always ones that are up and coming, and the likely presence of other SaaS tools that weren't accounted for probably make this number much larger. And then one of the things that, and I'm going to touch upon a product that we have that covers this in more detail in a little bit later in the presentation, is the risk of what's referred to as session takeover or session hijacking. So again, a common objection when it comes to identity security is I have MFA enabled. That solves all, right? And to be sure, MFA is a very important security measure to have in place. However, it is not a silver bullet for all things security. MFA can be bypassed, and session takeover or session hijacking is probably the most common way that it's bypassed. And again, it can be bypassed in a pretty easy way. That doesn't require a lot of skill from an attacker. So we talked about Stealer logs. If you essentially pair purchased fresh Stealer logs with what's called an anti-detect browser, so think of it as like a purpose-built browser for an attacker to easily replicate down to like the software and the version code and the version history of your Chrome browser, replicate your geolocation, everything like that, which makes it essentially easier to mirror an active session and bypass MFA and jump into an active session, which doesn't involve the login or authentication of passwords or anything like that at all. You're able to just recreate and replicate a session, which obviously has plenty of risks associated with it. And we'll talk about a specific use case and a specific product about that a little bit later. So park that thought for now. When you're thinking about, okay, where can I fit this information about identity intelligence and Stealer logs in a managed security posture? Because obviously, the folks attending this webinar, a lot of you, I'm assuming, will have different levels of services attached to the products that you're selling or reselling. How does this fit, right? And when you think of the macro challenges that exist, you see on the left that I talked about some, kind of like the modern way of work, how many SaaS tools typically exist in an environment. It really is the exploitation of the modern work environment from Stealer logs really poses a challenge again to most organizations. And then when you think of the posture that most companies that are serious about security have in place, I mentioned earlier, it's highly likely that your customers will have corporate machines protected. In almost all cases, visibility into personal machines will not be present. That's one feedback that we get from our customers quite a bit is okay, we kind of validated our corporate endpoint security posture, and we identified the use of corporate assets on machines that are not corporately issued as a key problem. This is one of the main sources of feedback that we get from our customers. Same thing with identity type offerings as well. This is still kind of a growing space, obviously, with a lot of vendors and a lot of activity for sure. The fact that Stealer logs can be leveraged to compromise an identity security posture is something that's certainly of interest, or it has been of interest in our clients and the partners that we've discussed with. The other angle too that is certainly worth mentioning as well is the idea that Stealer logs are essentially a pre-packaged toolkit that can be used in social engineering. There isn't, unfortunately, a foolproof defense, obviously, for a skilled social engineering attack. However, for an enterprise to be aware of corporate assets showing up in Stealer logs, that also kind of uncovers users that might be especially at risk, right, of a social engineering attack, and they can kind of be flagged and assigned extra training or particular extra attention so that the likelihood of them being exploited from a social engineering attack might be reduced. And this, I think, pretty well summarizes the section and the value of identity intelligence, particularly into the infostealer ecosystem. Summarized in 3 points that a customer ought to understand. You're expanding visibility at a fundamental way. You're seeing things that a traditional corporate security posture will not see. You'll be able to, the response capabilities I'll probably touch on a little bit more in our product later, but having artifacts like active sessions and compromised user accounts allow for more precise threat response capabilities. And then I just touched on the reduced end user risk point just now in terms of identifying users that are either violating corporate policies or behaving in a particularly risky way. It's an avenue where this outcome can be expected as well. Okay, I think we're okay for time. I'm just going to take a quick sip of coffee here. Alrighty, I'll get through these quickly so that I can get this over to you, Craig. A couple of interesting platform innovations. Here I'll get a little bit more salesy and talk about some of the differentiations that Flare has. I think I might have only mentioned AI once. We're going to talk about our AI product in a second here. This is just the high-level Flare architecture view. This is generally what a typical customer can expect to get from being a user of the Flare platform. AI, you're probably, contractually obligated to mention AI, as all companies are seemingly these days. It's noisy. There's a lot of wild claims being made about AI. What's sizzle and what's steak? I will, leave that up to you to discern. With that little cynical preamble out of the way, the one thing that we have learned for sure is that large language models and threat intelligence, there's a really strong use case there. When you think of the fact that most threat actor communication exists in text form, And if you've used something like ChatGPT to do things like translations or summarization, it's pretty easy to conceptualize the use case there as certainly a tangible one. We launched a Gen AI product called ThreatFlow in this past summer in August. Really quick here to summarize the value of it, and also in comparison to other threat intelligence products is the analogy that I've used is most other threat intelligence products or even other security products. It's being used as a summarizer of an alert or maybe a written piece of intelligence from a human. To use the analogy of journalism, it's kind of like having ChatGPT summarize maybe 10 articles about a specific subject. What ThreatFlow does is it allows the user to interact with primary sources in a way that is quite unique. So again, using the journalism analogy, it would allow the journalist, or in this case, the threat analyst, interact with a number of primary sources at scale much more quickly versus summarizing articles that have already been written. One of the things to key in on here is it's a transparent architecture. One of the challenges selling AI to security buyers, a lot of which are kind of cynical and skeptical about AI for good reasons, right? There's the kind of black box problem of this emerging technology where you're not really sure how the inputs are being used. One of the incredible things about ThreatFlow is that it's transparent. The architecture of it is fundamentally transparent, and it allows the user, if they wanted to really double check or scrutinize the output of the language model. I won't get into too much detail in here, just because of in the interest of time. The only other thing that I'll note is ThreatFlow was validated by a third party, by cybercrime researchers at the University of Montreal in a study, and their research comparing the outputs of ThreatFlow to literally manually summarizing and reviewing dark web and cybercrime data sources, they found it to be 98% accurate, which to my knowledge, ThreatFlow is one of the only cybersecurity Gen AI products that has been validated by a third party in this way. In terms of use cases that you can expect, these are some of the ones that have come up with our customers. It's particularly useful in either like fire drill type investigations. What I mean by that is like that's the 1 or 2 incidents a year that kind of reaches the consciousness of pretty much everybody in the security space. Very major incidents. Most recent examples, probably the big CrowdStrike incident that happened in July, where everybody's going to want answers on it. In the case of the CrowdStrike incident, ThreatFlow was very useful in providing reporting and intelligence summaries to customers. Same idea with topical events. For example, we had some customers using it for like the extra monitoring of the Olympic Games in the summertime. Monitoring which IOCs or exploits are being used more actively in dark web forums is another one. And then just kind of general scaled research. It's a way to, as opposed to, logging into each dark web site, it's a way to browse dark web forums at scale in a way that is effective. And then finally, I alluded to this product earlier. We launched an API product called Flare Account and Session Takeover Prevention, or ASTP. This is a way for partners or customers to leverage and then this will kind of get in the architecture of it, leverage our database of Stealer logs for the specific use case to prevent session takeovers. So it's an API first product, and it's particularly useful for these specific use cases. So fraud prevention, bot prevention, and then corporate identity security use cases. The main, I would say, ideal end customer for this is one that has a very widely used web application, and one customer that has the problem of account takeover defined. We're working closely with a lot of large web apps that are leveraging this product to prevent things like fraud. And if you're interested in learning more about this, please feel free to reach out. I realize that I don't want to take too much more time away from Craig to kind of get into the meat of our channel program. So I will send it over to you, Craig.
All right, thank you, Mark. So I want to first bring your attention to a partner success story. So if you go to the next slide. So a Flare partner, Secure Coders, was contacted by a very large multinational pharmaceutical firm, and the goal was to get a more comprehensive view of their exposure on both the dark and the clear web. I'm going to share results just from a brief POC that was done using Flare, and I'm going to use the term escalated alerts. In this context, what an escalated alert is, it's an alert that Flare found that met a certain severity threshold where they determined it needed immediate remediation. And there are 4 categories of escalated alerts that I'll share. First is an escalated alert for leak credentials. Most likely that was related to an executive's leak credentials. Second category was external attack surface. So most likely some critical infrastructure that required remediation. And then it gets more interesting, specifically related to the type of business that this pharmaceutical customer is in. The third category is financial fraud. So 5 cases of escalated alerts for financial fraud. This was most likely related to counterfeit drugs, and you can imagine how important proactively recognizing that would be to a firm like this. The last category was the one that really gets my attention. 9 cases of potential IP fraud. And you think about the pharma industry. This pharma firm is the maker of one of the largest weight loss drugs. Hundreds of millions of dollars are spent lobbying or for patent attorneys to protect their own IP. The value of proactively getting ahead of potential IP loss versus reactive remediation is incredibly valuable. And this is the type of value that you as a partner with Flare can bring to your customers. So next slide, Mark. We have developed tailored business models for various partner segments, and I'll give you just a few examples. For MSSPs, we have a robust multi-tenancy environment where we'll enable both UI and or API access for a combination of flexible service provider business models. For tech alliance partners who are more likely going to be accessing Flare data via API, we've got a robust API integration model and various cost models if you just want to consume Flare data. And then finally, for resellers, we offer 4 really simple to quote and sell t-shirt size bundles, and then a unique in the industry product-led channel motion that I want to walk you through right now. So next slide, Mark. So a high amount of Flare's leads that come in are via a free trial. And what we've done is integrated that and extended that to our partner community via 4 simple steps. So the first step is a literally one step demo that a partner AE can perform. And I'll walk you through that in a minute. Second step is a deal registration program that's similar to what you've used in the past. Third step is an automated communications workflow. And the 4th step is a fully supported free trial supported by our Inside SE team. So basically what you'll be able to do is via deal reg, you'll have the option to kick off a free trial for your customer. Next slide, Mark, and I'll drill into one level deeper of detail. So as an authorized Flare reseller partner, you get access to our partner portal. And that allows 2 things. One is you actually get access to the Flare platform itself, where you can view it and perform the one-step demo. Within the same portal, you get access to deal registration. Next slide, Mark. So I'm going to walk you through the one-step leak credentials demo. Some of you may have seen this last week. Flare maintains a database of 19 billion pairs of leaked credentials. So usually this is a username and password that has been stolen via stealer logs, as Mark discussed, and are available for marketed on the dark web. As a channel partner of Flare, you can navigate via the partner portal to this credentials browser section of the platform. And all you have to do is enter your customer's domain name. So you can be on a call with your customer, say, I've got something cool to show you. We just started working with this new vendor partner, Flare. Enter your customer's domain name, hit return, and Flare will pull up the list of all of the leak credentials that we have access to in our database. So this is going to be a list of real corporate email addresses along with the password that has been breached. Seriously, this is a one-step demo. So I know a lot of you might say, hey, I leave demoing to my SE or to the vendor. If you can type in the domain name of your customer, you can perform the one-step leak credentials demo. Next slide. From there, and again, via the same partner portal, you have access to registration. So like with most deal reg programs, you enter your information and then the deal information. But what's unique about our model is you now have the option, yes or no, to push a free trial to your customer. Next slide. We've developed an automated workflow. If the deal does not exist in our CRM, we automatically approve it and automatically send you an acceptance message. There's no concept of letting it sit in our system where a vendor rep can sit on it for days and decide what to do. If it's not in our CRM, you automatically get an acceptance. It automatically gets populated in our HubSpot system, and you get the following discounts: 10% standard plus 20 registered for a total of 30. Next slide, Mark. What your customer will get is an email that brings them to a co-branded free trial offer. So in this case, we've shown the co-branded offer with our partner Ironbow Technologies. Your customer now will have the option to fill out this free trial form. If they go through it, they'll be able to go through a free trial on their own, which is assisted by our inside SE team. Next slide, Mark. So in summary, we're calling this a product-led channel motion. And just to kind of summarize the steps, as an authorized partner, you get access to the one-step demo, really easy to perform, deal registration, and automated workflow pushing to a free trial. Next slide. So that's the summary of our content today. I want to introduce you to the Flare channel engagement team. You know Mark. Hosting our session today is Eunice Lung, our partner marketing manager. Ashley Ailstock is our director of channel in the Americas, and I run our overall global partner program. With that, Eunice, I'd like to open it up to answer a few questions. The question is, what if a business provides both services and retail? Do they have to choose one or the other? The answer is absolutely not. And actually, our contract allows you to choose both. We have distinct pricing models, but one of the beauties of Flare is a solution provider can offer both managed services and resale, all part of the same relationship. Mark, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I'm assuming the question is referred to like Flare's database, cybercrime database. The answer would be constantly. In fact, one of the cool things that we also added real quick here in the past year is the concept of emerging sources. So there's continuous collection. Our collection and threat research team are constantly adding sources. There's also a growing category of what we're calling emerging sources. These are different data sets. For example, a simple one to give is we just added SEC 8K filings. So, last year the SEC mandated that all U.S. publicly traded companies added or disclose cyber incidents in their quarterly reporting for investors. That's something that we kind of identified as an easy value added for customers that they can opt in for, and along with all the other threat exposure data sets that we described earlier in the presentation. They can also receive any, if any of their key members of their supply chain or partners or any publicly traded companies they do business with, they'll get that 8K filing information as well on the Flare platform. So short answer, we're constantly updating the data set, and we're constantly looking for new sources to add value for customers.
Who are some of your key integration partners? Mark, go ahead and take that.
Sure. Biggest, I guess, off the top of my head, Splunk. We have a Splunk app on the Splunk marketplace. A number of customers as well are integrations with Microsoft Azure Sentinel and the Microsoft suite of security products. Those are probably the two biggest ones. We have a combination of native integrations, but then also Flare is very much an API first company. We have robust API documentation and SDKs that can be leveraged to integrate with most security systems. Yeah, similar, good question, and I would say definitely a similar answer. You know, Flare would be a very good complement, I think, to like a core threat detection and response system like a SIM, SOAR, or an XDR platform, like I just mentioned, Splunk and Microsoft Sentinel would be two
I would add,
solid examples.
I would add ServiceNow as well, ticketing systems like that.
Yep. It's a good call out for sure. Yeah.
Any others?
No, I think those are the questions for now. We can give it a couple of minutes, but I think that's all at the moment. I see. Oh, one more came through.
Do you offer CPPO transactions through cloud marketplaces? Great question. We are getting our AWS marketplace set up as we speak. We expect to have it done early in Q1, and as part of that, we'll certainly offer consulting partner private offer transactions. Good question.
And we've got one more question just from Larry, asking you directly, Craig, of who's your favorite partner? He knows it's Ironbow.
You're all our favorites. Eunice,
Right.
I think that's good.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we will call it at that. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Oh, we have one more. Do you want to actually take a look at this one?
If we are MFP's prize one to equivalent. Good question. It will depend on the license that you purchased, but in general, the current model for MSSPs that we have is that you buy tiers of identifiers, and you can use those with any number of end user customers that you have. So the idea is that you don't have to buy an additional license per customer. But again, I would say that depends on the license. If you're an existing Flare partner, it may depend on the license that you purchased.
Okay,
Eunice, I think we can wrap.
Yeah, that brings us right at time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's session. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of the emails in the slide shown. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.